Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. I am a little bit out of practice after 3 weeks without streams or videos. I did try to have a stream, I don't know, a week or so ago, but then I had terrible internet problems, so I just let it be and just waited until I got it over with all my personal stuff. It's all right. Now I have more time. Starting next week, I'll be able to create at least 2 videos per week, more likely 3 or so. So I'm very much looking forward to that. That way we won't be having any kind of need for roundups and rumor summaries. We'll be able to cover the most recent leaks and rumors right away as they keep coming out. And so as you can see from the amount of topics that I just put in the title, there's a lot we can talk about and we will talk about. There's also just simply even almost breaking news, even though it's been happening over the last day or so, when it comes to Dbrand and their Twitter kerfuffle. And beyond all of that, there's always the regular flow of Apple-related stuff. Of course, we are looking forward to M3 or maybe M4-based iPad Pro models. We have had more talk about the transistor node that would be used on the iPhone 17 models. Those are the models coming out next September, not this one. And before I do much else, let me just briefly make sure that my image is fully aligned, because for some reason on my iPad it doesn't look that way, but let's hope for the best. As always, please let me know if there are any audio or video issues. I, of course, am always pretty paranoid about that kind of stuff, so I hope it all works fine for all of us. I downgraded from 4K to 1440p, and I downgraded from 60 FPS to 30 FPS, so that's 1/4 the bandwidth in theory for upload, so I hope my internet is capable of handling that, and I'm getting a new network provider starting next week or so. So that should help as well. As always, please let me know in the comments what you would like to talk about beyond the topics we are discussing, what you think of the topics we are discussing. And if you like this channel, please subscribe, comment, share, all the YouTube jazz, as I call it. Jamie, welcome to the chat. Welcome to all the other people watching. To all those who have missed it, I apologize for not having been here for quite a while. This will be remedied. I will be back to a somewhat regular schedule. If you want to support this channel really, really directly, you can find my Patreon link in the description of this channel, or you can, while I'm live, send me a super chat or a super sticker. Of course, all support is very much appreciated, as is just you watching these videos. So let's start with the most hot button topic, racism. I'm usually not a drama guy, even though I know that's actually how a lot of you guys met me, because of my coverage of the Linus Tech Tip situation when Gamers Nexus covered their, let's say, falling quality standards. But I usually don't talk too much about stuff that is highly inflammatory. This is obviously a little bit of that variety, which is on Twitter, Dbrand, which, as you know, is a major sponsor of many YouTubers. They're a Canadian case maker and skin maker for devices. So the people most associated with Dbrand are Linus Tech Tips, to a degree Marquez as well, but pretty much every tech YouTuber I know has at some point or another worked together with Dbrand. So as I said, they are a Canadian company, so they're Western, and they got themselves into some issues. Now I'm covering this for 2 issues. First, I don't like Dbrand. I hate their obnoxious marketing. I think their products are not as good as they claim they are, the other major reason is that I know that I have a lot of people watching these videos, not live unfortunately, but afterwards, which is also appreciated, coming from markets like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and this is specifically a problem problem with an Indian tech guy on Twitter. So, and as somebody who has a last name that has often been like either miswritten or even to a degree made fun of, I fully empathize with his problems with Dbrand here. So Dbrand is known for their kind of provocative responses on Twitter, right? I think for anyone who is on Twitter, there are like two companies who are like known to have very edgy marketing, and those are Dbrand and Opera, the browser makers. But the browser makers are actually kind of based, like their jokes are actually funny. They have like cool profile pictures that they change depending on what time of year it is, right? If there's some kind of holiday or something, they will usually have something slightly satirical to cover that. But Dbrand is more like, like the edgy teen angst guy who's like really aggressive because, my parents don't understand me, right? I don't know why I regressed back to the 90s for this, but you know what I mean. And so a guy on Twitter, I will not attempt to pronounce his name, but he's from India and he covers some tech stuff. He's not huge by any means, but people respond like when he posts stuff, and he basically checked out the skin for MacBook from Dbrand, and he covered it in the following way. You can argue whether it's fair or not. I think it's absolutely fair. It's one of the reasons why I personally don't use like Dbrand stuff, or in fact most like cheaper skins like this. So he bought it a couple months back, couldn't even remain the same color after 2 months. You can see like the discoloration. It's not a great photograph, but you can definitely see the problem. It's after just 2 months, so the couple of months is literally the lowest a couple can be. So what should he do, right? And yeah, so you can read his name, right? It's like, it starts with like you would do chit chat, and then like I don't know, everything I have as an example would also be misconstrued, but you can see it, right? It's I'll pronounce it. It's chit range, right? But right, I have not much experience with pronouncing Indian names. I have no problem admitting that, right? But I'm pretty respectful about that, right? The reason why I even pronounce his name at all is because obviously, well, Dbrand thought it was appropriate to respond to his very reasonable criticism, saying, what should he do? And hashtagging it with Dbrand complaint. Well, they said his name is Shitrash, right? Because, well, yeah, you could read it that way, but I mean, you could also read like a ton of other like insults out of it, because languages are very different, right? Like, for example, a very famous, very common Vietnamese male name is literally the Russian word for dick. I'm a native Russian speaker. I come from Moldova, so when I had a friend who called me, told me his name, I was initially like, what? Well, I was 5 years old, right? But guess who never made fun of him because of that? And Dbrand apparently is not at quite the level that I was at 5 years old, which is so like, so be serious for one, like, what is that even supposed to mean, right? And that, because this is a legitimate complaint, right? He didn't say like, oh, Dbrand killed my parents and like raped me or something like that. I have no idea why I just said that. Oh my god. But Jesus, I watched too much Red Letter Media over the weekend. And the point here is that, so they insulted him. They didn't in any way, shape, or form comment on the actual complaint that is actually reasonable, right? So instead, this obviously created no solution for his issue. It created a shitstorm on Twitter, right? And people were basically calling them out right away. They said, like, keep the same energy in the apology tweet, because everybody knows that something like this will eventually be followed up by an apology tweet. They said no. They told them to, like, delete it and make an apology tweet. And then they basically insulted other people who basically wanted just for them to be nicer. And later on, I don't know if it's in this article, but Marques from MKBHD, Marques Brownlee, also got involved in this, and he said that he will not work with them together until this is resolved. Now, he put some very lax criteria on how they should resolve it, and they basically tried, which I'll cover right away. But yeah, Marques it's good for him to do that. I wish he kind of did more, but it is what it is. All these YouTubers, even the biggest one, still don't really want to lose, like, their biggest financiers. So Dbrand basically summarized that topic later on. So that's today, April 11th. And they said, well, that escalated quickly. Yes, we made fun of a guy's name. It was a huge fumble. You see, they just said they wouldn't apologize. And then they did. We apologized to him directly and offered him $10,000 as a gesture of goodwill. I wonder if that's Canadian or US dollars. I think he should take it, but I think that this $10,000 should really be just a gesture of goodwill. It should not be like a non-disclosure agreement or something like that, or something that would prohibit him from commenting on Dbrand in the future or anything else like it. I think that $10,000 should just be handed over to him, and then be done with it, and then hope that customers will forgive them, that he will forgive them, and that it's fine. And they contextualize this, which is basically this is apologia for themselves. I don't like that kind of shit. I think it's very beneath, like, a big international company. We've been poking fun at consumers on social media for over a decade. Yeah, maybe you shouldn't be doing that in this aggressive kind of way. We are not going to stop, which, like, why not say we are not going to do it in this aggressive of a way? Why are you saying we are not going to stop, but maybe next time you'll be the one who gets $10,000? By the way, I really want this to, like, reach the upper echelons of the company, like, fully, so that people up there will be like, oh, you know, our Twitter account got us into some trouble, right? And we had to pay out $10,000. And they'll be like, oh, okay, man. It's like, we don't want to pay, really, but it's better to pay up and then be done with it. Oh, and by the way, the Twitter account promises to not stop this, and that in the future, this is basically setting a precedent that we'll pay $10,000 for whomever the Twitter account insults in that way. Like, at that point, I'm firing the entire fucking social media arm of the company and just, like, saying, no, bro, we need somebody who has a sense of humor, who is a little edgy, but who is smart. And, like, you don't even write this kind of apology. Like, I understand it's all a joke, but it's literally a lot of money. Like, that dude, like, I feel for him, right? But it's not like he deserves $10,000. And while I think that Dbrand is a shit show of a company sometimes, I don't think that executives who try to produce okay products deserve to be constantly pulled to the bank and paid $10,000 whenever their Twitter account does something stupid. So, yeah, this is basically currently developing. I don't know if, like, Linus will, like, comment on any of this. So basically, consider actually following this guy on Twitter. You can see, like, his Twitter handle right there. I'll probably put it in the description of the YouTube video afterwards. It's kind of crazy to let it happen this way. Like, I'm not one of the guys who's like, oh, like white people should be extra careful because of history and blah blah blah. But like, come on, like, you're a Canadian company who literally like tries to attack a guy from India based on how his name might be read by you, right? Doesn't even mean that it's pronounced the same way in like Indian or something like that. So really, so it started on April 8th and then it escalated over yesterday and today. Good to know. I was very busy those last 3 days. So it's basically bad. Give the guy some love, gives Dbrand some heat if you feel like it. I personally have said time and time again that this kind of marketing is completely pointless. It's edgy in the most pointless teenage way, and it is outright something that could end up hurting the company in the long run. I have no idea, honestly, how successful Dbrand actually is, with how much money they are paying YouTubers. I assume they actually have that money, or if they're perpetually burning that money to increase their market share in terms of cases and skins and stuff like that. I have never seen a person like in regular life here in Germany use a Dbrand case, so maybe that's something for very much North American, and for me it just has escaped my grasp to a degree. But I would also argue, as long as they also make like pseudo apologies like this, just don't support them, right? I think this is a very easy case of like voting with your wallet and withholding your money to a company that you don't think deserves it. And I'm usually not a guy who like targets issues like that, but I actually want to keep covering this if there's more to it, right? If they announce that they will be firing because of it or something like that, because quite honestly, I think whoever made that original tweet either deserves to be like put on a month leave or 2 without pay, or deserves to be outright fired, because this is literally a very poorly done job that literally harms the company by a solid amount of money potentially, and then a broader amount of money that is like whatever is basically the hit to their reputation. And beyond that, I would just also argue that respecting others, people, culture, and having a basic understanding of dignity, that especially in a fair like minded conversation like what he tried to start, yeah, I think this is all what we should aspire to. Just be respectful. You can make a joke, especially after a situation has been resolved, but maybe not this kind of joke. And I'm not a censor type of guy. Like, my favorite TV show is literally South Park. I love me some crass humor. I can stand some humor against my people. I can make jokes against other people. But I do it in a way that is not personal like they are trying to do. So don't be a snowflake, but also don't be a crass fucking moron on social media, especially if you have serious money that you stand to lose. So this is my take on it. I would love to know what you guys think about it. Let me know in the comments. Let me know on Twitter, similar to my Patreon account. My Twitter account is also in the description of this channel. So yeah, it's just a very stupid topic, and from something very stupid, I would like to move on to something very sad. Segues, my strength. And that is the delay, or the supposed delay, the internal delay, the delay according to rumors, the delay from one rumor to another rumor of both the iPad Pro and the iPad Air. And when I say both, I mean both iPad Pro models and both iPad Air models and both the iPad Pro and the iPad Air. So, according to Mark Gurman, and I've heard some other smaller people reiterate that, I don't know, some people just jump on the bandwagon whenever Mark Gurman says something, they pretend that their sources are saying the same thing. But he's now basically saying to expect the iPad Pro for the second week of May. Now, that doesn't mean that it will be released or basically shown off on the second week of May. That will most likely be either the first week of May or the last week of April. But this is when it will basically hit stores, start to be sold to customers, stuff like that. Now, Jamie Ibrahim already commented on this in the chat, which is we have gotten identifiers for the iPad models, and I'll be using Jamie here directly as a source, so I don't have to find it online. He is saying that it will be using a T8132 chip, which does not match the M2's identifiers of T8112 or M3's identifiers of T8122. Now, basically everything Jamie is saying, including the fact that the iPad models are labeled as iPad 16 and not as iPad 15, which would be more logically the label for devices that have the M3 chip, because M2 devices had the label of 14. We can compare like similar like Mac models numbers and iPad model numbers, and usually they have some alignment with the chip used. It's become a little more complicated now that the iPad is clearly like updated a while after the Macs, but let's see if that aligns. I'll just briefly try to search for that to see if there is any kind of like reasonable validity to that, because I obviously don't want to present any kind of false information to you. T13 iPad. I bet it is 16, 18, T8132. This is German, which I don't obviously want to open. Tom's Guide. This was a month ago. Yeah, because I've heard that identifiers were leaked, but that one is the T8101, which is the base level iPad with A14. Do we have... but basically also this helps us like leak stuff like for example, if the Pro iPhone models have the same chipsets as the base iPhone models, this is supposedly how we know that like the iPhone 16 and 16 Pro, unlike what the 15 and 15 Pro have, which are the A16 and the A17 Pro, so very different chips, they supposedly would have the same A18 processor, maybe one with more cores or something like that, but supposedly the same die. I cannot find it. Command F T81. So here is the iPad mini with its coverage, which would supposedly be getting the T8130. But that aligns, in my opinion, Jamie, because if the T8130 is the A17 chip, wouldn't that make then the T8132 chip the M3, right? Because I try to be very precise here. We've heard some rumors. Basically, this is why I'm entertaining this idea. A while ago, we've heard that the iPad Pro would be the first device to get a certain new processor. At that point, when we still believed that the iPad Pro would be coming out in late 2023 or early 2024, we believed it could be the first device with an M3 chip. But obviously, that became the M3 MacBook Pro. And the M3 iMac, and eventually the M3 MacBook Air just very recently. So I'm and now basically the idea is, well, now the iPad is not the first device to get this new processor, but it's unlikely to get a new processor, right? I mean, it will get a processor that is already in the MacBooks, right? And I don't know, like, according to that old rumor, it was either supposed to get the M3 first or maybe the M4. But the question with the M4 is, what would change? Does Apple already have access to enough N3E production at TSMC and something like that? So, yeah, this is just all very fascinating to me. Jamie, T8122 is M3. It might be based on 3nm version of A16, which will likely explains the 18 TOPS NPU. Well, yes and no. The M3 is in some ways based on the A16 NPU, but its GPU is very much the just like a bigger version of what is on the A17 Pro. That's how we got stuff like ray tracing. So the M3 is kind of like a mishmash, a little bit of like A16 stuff that was a little bit left over, so a lot of A17 stuff, but not everything, like it's newer NPU, Apple Neural Engine and stuff like that. So yeah, so T8122 processor. T8122 processor, Apple. Yeah, okay, so T8122 is apparently the M3. So if there's any like realistic leaks of it being 8132, right, then it would be an M4. Maybe Apple would have a different name for something like an M3 with faster RAM or something like that. So again, I'm not trying to dispute you, Jamie. I'm just really trying to cover what is actually realistic here. We heard the A16 was supposed to have the redesigned GPU. Yes, I'm just not saying that the GPU of the A17 Pro is the GPU of the A16 because of what was supposed to happen, right? I'm saying the A17's GPU is the A17's GPU, and the M3 seems to have a GPU that largely aligns with the GPU of the A17. Yes, I've heard the rumor that the A16 was supposed to be the first basically Apple chip with a brand new GPU with ray tracing and all the other stuff that we now know define the A17 GPU, like dynamic caching, for example. But apparently that design was too power hungry for the A16, which was built on N4 at TSMC, so they basically scrapped it and waited until they could put it in a 3nm chip. And the problem with 3nm obviously was that it was delayed by a year, because everything to me suggests that A16 was always supposed to be Apple's first 3nm chip, but they basically couldn't because TSMC started going from a 2-year schedule to a 3-year schedule, at least for the gap from 5nm to 3nm. So yeah, basically, if you are correct, Jamie, that there is an identifier that like the iPad that the next iPad would use a T8132 chip, then yeah, there could be something new about that chip. It could still be called an M3, and as I said, it could be like an M3 chip with LPDDR5X memory or something like that. I don't know. Or it could legitimately be a full-on M4 chip based on N3E, but N3E would be very, very early. Like, I really wouldn't expect an N3E chip before like August, I guess, even if it was like in low quantities. And at that point, it wouldn't be like announced in May. At that point, it would likely be announced at WWDC in June and then like come out a month later or so. So again, guys, this is all very, very speculative. Jamie is a good supporter. and he has some cool info, and I like to cover it, but yeah, I don't want to wake any, like, this is for example why the title of this video isn't like M4 OLED iPad Pro. It's like I honestly don't know, right? So, but we did have iPad identifier leak, right? Apple chip plan 2024. What is this? Why can I not open this? No, I'm not turning off. iPhone 16 Pro Max. So possibly A18 chip. Yeah, those are the identifiers of the actual devices, not of the processors, unfortunately. The processor in this Apple leak only confirms that Apple will use the same family of chips with the identifier T8140, which probably indicates the A18 processors. Right, so the iPhone naming is basically like one gen ahead. So the 40 series would be the A18. But if an M4 that like corresponds to A18 would be 132, right? Because because M3 is 122. As far as I got from this. Finally, the upcoming OLED iPad Pro has the M chip identifier T8132 with codenames previously revealed. Again, this is M3 identifier, right? Apple chip plan. The M3 is likely. However, M3, okay, so this is the rumor stuff that you pointed out. M3 NPU is only tops. M3 has to. Jamie, did you write this? This sounds all like you. T8, Command F. T8. Okay, so the A14. Oh, right. That's because yeah, that makes sense actually, because there was like no A16 like processor. There was like no 4nm based M3 or something like that. M3 skipped basically this generation of iPhone level. Yeah, Jamie, in that way you would actually be correct. Yes, if that chip identifier is actually like really reliably a 132 and it's not a result of maybe some test device or something like that, then yes, you would be correct. A T8132 would be equivalent to an M4 processor. Yes. So that article that we've covered right here actually does not understand what people are covering here on the Mac Rumors forums. I'm actually learning a lot here. This is actually quite cool. A17 is T8130, so base M chip would follow with a T8132. Yeah, that's correct. However, M3 is T8122, suggesting that it's based at least in part. And quite honestly, I think this would just be a naming convention thing. I don't think this has anything to do with what it's based on. I think this is basically just Apple adding another number. However, if we actually get like 8132, yeah, then it would be a newer generation. It doesn't mean it would identically correspond to A17, for example, or A18. It could be actually a mix of like a little bit some architecture pulled from older chips, a little bit of architecture that then will come also to future chips, a node that is now only available and stuff like that. Again, if you still ask me to bet, I would bet on the iPad using the M3 simply for logistical reasons. But yes, Jamie, thank you very much for giving us a lot of food for thought. We'll have plenty of time to further analyze this because, as I said, the iPads are delayed. We're getting two models of both the iPad Pro and the iPad Air. We are getting an 11-inch and 13-inch OLED iPad Pro and a 10.9 and 12.9-inch iPad Air. So basically, I would assume they would take like the same physical like size but the Airs would just have larger bezels, and I assume that the iPad Pros would be thinner because they use like an OLED panel, which obviously can be thinner than an LCD that needs a backlight. And obviously Apple is obsessed with making iPads impossibly thin, no matter how little that actually benefits consumers. I would also bet that both iPad Pro and iPad Air this generation around, which at this point would be an M2 and an M3, maybe an M4 and an M2. Regardless, the one thing we know is that most likely the iPad Air is not getting the M3. It would just be updated from M1 to M2. Basically both iPad Pro and Air would support Magic Keyboard and Apple Pencil accessories that would be upgraded. We've heard about a new Apple Pencil that supposedly supports the Apple Vision Pro, so you could write like basically in space with it perfectly. I have no idea how good that's going to be, but I would be very intrigued. Obviously Vision Pro is neither available in my region, nor do I have plans to buy the first gen Apple Vision Pro. But it's just a cool thing about that. And the Magic Keyboard is rumored to be more Mac-like, mainly having like an aluminum bottom portion, which would make it like ridiculously heavy. I have no idea how Apple plans to sell people on that idea, but it would be a very interesting thing in my opinion if like if this basically becomes a full-on like $2,500 once you get it all together. And this is basically the last part about the rumors, is that the iPad Pros are rumored to get a price hike. Currently the iPad Pro 11-inch model starts at $799, the 13-inch model starts at $1099. Originally, like months and months ago, we've heard rumors that this would go up to like $11.99 and this would go all the way up to $15.99. I have bet, I believe, $100 or something like that I would be giving to a charity if that is correct, because I personally have said I believe this will be a full $1,000 and this will be either $12.99 or $13.99, depending on if there are some big changes actually inside, and I've like some changes that I cannot predict, like maybe Apple goes all out on the cameras for some reason, right, and that adds like $20 to the production, and Apple decides to ask another $100 of us, right? So $12.99 is where I would see the 13-inch iPad Pro, and at that point I would see it most likely going from 128 gigabytes of base storage to 256, and if it's $13.99, then I definitely basically know that it will have 256 gigabytes of base storage, because at that point the comparison to the MacBooks would be just so insulting in terms of price, especially given the case that the Magic Keyboard will probably cost like $350 still, or maybe go all the way up to $400. The Apple Pencil $150, maybe $180 or something like that, if it has some cool like super exclusive functionality, and Apple might still keep selling like an Apple Pencil 2. I don't know if like the designs will be compatible, but maybe they still are, and at that point Apple could say like, oh, buy the Apple Pencil 2 for $120, or buy the Apple Pencil 3 for $180, and it's like compatible with Vision Pro, and it's like the fastest, most responsive Apple Pencil with interchangeable magnetic tips and something like that. So again, the pricing is very much up in the air. What we basically understand though is that the pricing will not be downright schizophrenic, like it will not go up by we've heard some stuff that this could be like $1,800, right? And that will not be happening. $12.99 is my prediction. $13.99 could still be possible as the new base price, unless Apple starts bundling like the Apple Pencil or the Magic Keyboard with them. Then I'm fully on the train that Apple would increase prices, but I've also always argued, why would they bundle accessories? it just doesn't make sense, given that the way they create accessories now. They can be very like optimistic in their production numbers. They can sell it to iPad Air owners, iPad Pro owners. They can basically like make sure that the margins on them are very high. But whoever is still just very happy with an iPad as a slate that you just look at, just maybe write on, they don't have to think, oh, who needs a Magic Keyboard, and oh, who needs an Apple Pencil. That basically is left to the consumer, and I think it's better this way. So again, they say it's unclear if iPad Air will get M2 or M3 processors. I will be very surprised if it would get M3, because I think M2 is like decently better than M1. iPad Air genuinely is less exciting for people, like based on performance. It already does not have stuff like a ProMotion screen, so it does not even need that much top-notch performance. So in my opinion, the Air gets M2, and then the iPad Pro gets maybe the T8132, right? It would be, right? If it's an M4, or if it's M3, it would be the T8122. So thank you, Jamie, for educating us on a lot of that. So by that logic, the A18 chip would then be the T8140. And if we see rumors that that both iPhone 16 and 16 Pro have a chip based on that number, basically with a 4 in that case, then we would know that they are both getting the A18. Whereas if we get leaks like that, and the one of those new iPhones which would have still a T8130 chip, then it would be an A17 chip. I wonder if Apple would create any kind of like naming deviations based on Pro and non-Pro variants for the A series, but that is. I don't know if they did that for the A15, right? I don't think they did between like the 5 and the 4 core GPU version. I don't think they would do that for the A18 either, because what matters is the actual die, right? It's the silicon itself. If some part of it is cut off, right, basically doesn't matter much. Guys, I'm seeing that we have quite a lot of people watching. Please let me know what you think. Please let me know what you would like to see me cover beyond this, or if there's anything you wish me to clarify. And please let me know if like the audio and video quality is working out for you. And if you're enjoying this, please, beyond the chatting, consider subscribing, sharing. And if you want to support this channel directly, you can find my Patreon link in the description of this channel, or while watching live, feel free to leave a super chat or a super sticker. All support is very much appreciated, as is of course if you just choose to watch the video, so no pressure. Why am I jumping to these old sayings? So that's actually very, very interesting iPad stuff. Of course, the main culprit of the delay will most likely be the OLED panel, the most advanced OLED panel supposedly in the world right now. It will be a double-stacked OLED, which will be Apple's key to high peak brightness, good longevity. So basically the idea is it's an OLED that does not have the downsides of the mini LED panel on the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, which is mainly the blooming. So if you have like a dark background, but then you display like white text on it or something like that, basically using a website in dark mode, then the display around that white text blooms, right? It gets bright even though there is not supposed to be something there. And that comes from, even though the iPad has a lot of local dimming zones by mini LED standards, it has over 2,000 local dimming zones on a 13-inch panel. That obviously pales in comparison to OLED, which has a pixel by pixel level contrast adjustment, and basically by turning off individual pixels and not having a backlight that can bloom in the first place, you get perfect pitch dark blacks. And so the problem with OLED, if you actually look at devices like the Galaxy Galaxy Tab, you'll find that they're much darker the larger a panel gets, right? So while your phone, for example, the iPhone 15 Pro Max gets up to 2000 nits, Samsung advertises their peak brightness at 2500 nits, even though that is basically never been proven. And I'll actually be a little dramatic here and show you what I mean. Nope. GSM Arena. So if we go to the Galaxy S24 Ultra, I'll be spicy today and basically have some controversial takes. So we go to the lab tests, and they actually test a lot, everything from like peak brightness for the display to very comprehensive battery tests, as you can see here, to even like speaker quality and charging speeds. So they're a very detailed website. They're mostly Android focused, but they do some good iPhone coverage as well. And I wanted to show you this, which is basically like this, they test on a 75% peak, 75% of the display, which is pretty realistic if you have like a large wide website, for example. And the iPhone gets up to like 1800 nits, right? The latest ROG phone, which is like a gaming phone with like a lot of cooling capacity and stuff like that, that one gets that close to such brightness levels. And iPhone advertises itself as 2000 nits, and Samsung advertises itself as 2500 nits. Do you see the difference? This is very like, this has happened time and time again this generation. Unfortunately, like a lot of Android phones, I believe, have felt like insulted by the iPhone 14 Pro Max holding like the highest peak brightness crown for a year. And so they started advertising brightness levels that really nobody could ever confirm. I have no idea, like, and then like especially Chinese vendors like OnePlus have started advertising like HDR brightness, which is like for like 1% of the display, and this is how we get like brightness claims of like 3500, 4000 nits of brightness for like the OnePlus phones, the Vivo phones. But when you actually look at the somewhat relevant test in how a device will actually perform in real life, you'll find that the iPhone is the only phone that gets close to its actual advertised peak brightness. The latest ROG phone, which obviously came out over a year after the iPhone 14 Pro Max, which has about the same brightness as the 15 Pro Max, gets there, but I believe that's still lower than what they advertise. And then Samsung doesn't even come close to what they promised. So that's... Again, this is a little bit of like a diversion for me, because again, I was talking about the OLED iPad Pros, but for anybody who knows, like the current mini LED on the 12.9-inch iPad Pro delivers you 600 nits in like regular brightness, in SDR, in full screen brightness, and then HDR brightness goes up to 1600 nits, and that is basically both things are impossible with OLED. I think you could probably get to 500 nits all screen brightness with standard OLEDs, just if you plug the screen from the Galaxy Tab or something for the iPad. But yes, if you want to have like the highest quality screen, you basically have to find a new solution, and Apple's double stacked OLEDs are so advanced that they currently have very low yields. They are very expensive to make, so this will be the reason for the price increases, but also the reason why we didn't get the iPad Pros in March, when we were supposed to get them, not even in April, and most likely then only in May. So if you want OLED, you also kind of have to blame OLED for being the main culprit of problems for this iPad generation. The iPad Air will be using standard LCD, most likely not even ProMotion, but just like 60 Hertz, and most people who buy them won't care at all, just like the people who buy MacBook Airs don't care that they don't have ProMotion either. Now, I still encourage people to get the MacBook Pro instead for its active cooling, its larger battery, its better peak brightness, and its ProMotion screen, but most people still end up buying the MacBook Air simply because it's cheaper, even though I consider the value of the M3 MacBook Pro to be higher, and it will depend on the pricing of the iPad Air versus the iPad Pro, if that will stay true for basically the iPad Air and the iPad Pro. Currently in the lineup, I think that, for example, the 11-inch iPad Pro is better value than the 10.9-inch iPad Air because of ProMotion, because of its faster M2 chip versus M1, because even extra stuff like LiDAR sensors, but first and foremost because its base storage on the iPad Pro is 128 gigabytes, which is not a lot, but it's a lot better than the 64 gigabyte base storage on the iPad Air. This is why I believe that both the iPad Air and the iPad Pro will double their base storage this year, but also we'll see a small price increase for the Air and a big price increase for the Pro. So, I apologize, my voice is getting a little hoarse. I kind of expected this to be like a 30-40 minute video, but then the Dbrand stuff came out, and then I got like really enthusiastic about iPhone and MacBook chip numbers. And speaking of Apple processors, we actually have some good news, but we don't know how verified that news is. I tried to add some extra context to it, but a lot of the information we have from TSMC themselves is pretty old. So what am I talking about? Well, anybody who follows this information closely as I do, I apologize, knows that the A19 Pro and the M3 chips are currently based on a transistor node from TSMC that is called N3B. It's basically their first generation 3nm chip. It's still a FinFET architecture, so it's not quite the bleeding edge GAAFET that we're supposed to get from Intel and Samsung. But soon TSMC will be upgrading to 2nm, right? So even more density, GAAFET structure, eventually with an N2P, a successor to like the base 2nm node. They will also offer stuff like backplane power delivery. Basically, it will make chips faster, more efficient, all the good stuff that we like. Now, given how the 3nm schedule turned out, which is we had like the A14 chip, which launched in 2020 on 5nm. Then we had the A15 chip in 2021, which launched on N5P, a second generation 5nm node. And then we kind of expected the A16 to be our first 3nm chip, because usually it takes TSMC like basically like one interim generation, and then the next chip will be based on a brand new node, right? That didn't happen. The A16 had another 5nm variant that they just called 4nm or N4. And then the A17 Pro was our first chip to get 3nm, in this case N3B. When you look at M1 chip, the original M1 launched basically almost simultaneously with the A14. It was also based on N5. Then the M2 was built on N5P, similar to the A15. Then, as we've discussed before, the A16 didn't have an M-series counterpart. Instead, they waited longer and they released the M3 on the same node as the A17 Pro, also N3B. Now, by the logic of the current schedule, we should be getting an A18 chip on N3E, which is a second generation 3nm node. It's basically designed to be easier to build for TSMC and even a little cheaper. So it's not necessarily that much better, but it's much more mass producible. And afterwards, most of us speculated that we would move on to a node called N3P. So similar to how the A15 was built on the N5P node versus the N5 node in the A14. I apologize if I'm bumming you out with all those numbers. Then the A19 would be based on N3P, and then the A20 would transition to 2 nanometer, and then the A21 would have N2P, which, as I said before, would be basically a follow-up to this. Now, you can actually see all of this here, and the reason why I hid it from you is because this is somewhat controversial of a timeline, because people don't, like even experts don't fully know how to read this schedule. The idea behind this is basically TSMC is saying we can produce certain nodes at certain point, right, for the high end, which is a little bit more niche. Mainly they mean by this Apple, right? You can basically think that when the year aligns, this is basically an Apple node, and then the mainstream is usually there should be like one graph in between where they show like that everybody but Apple gets it 1 year later, and then the mainstream, which is like cheaper models, yes, those feature much older nodes for a much longer period of time. Now you can actually see that everything that I've said aligns perfectly with their high-end predictions, right? Obviously this is retrospectively given that it was April of last year, but it still stands, right? For 2018 N7, this is when the A12 chip got 7 nanometer, absolutely correct. Then the A13 got N7P or N7 Plus, they called it back in the day. Then in 2020 N5, this is when we got the A14 and the M1 processor. 2021 N5P, this is when we got the A15 chip, and then later the M2 processors based on that architecture. N7A doesn't interest us. N7A is their automotive nodes. Then N4 2022, this is when the iPhone 14 got, no wait, the iPhone, yeah, this is when the iPhone 14 got it. Well, this is iPhone 12, this is iPhone 13, yeah, the iPhone 13 with the A15 chip. This is iPhone 14 with the A16 chip. That's all correct. And then 2023 was correct, right? This chip, this lineup, actually, like this prediction predates the actual like release of the 3 nanometer chip. But this is what we got in late 2023 from Apple. We got an N3 based, in this case N3B, but they call usually their first node just and blah blah blah, and then without many letters. And then most of other manufacturers got N4P, which is basically a better, slightly better node than N4. And for servers, they have N4X. I don't know how many manufacturers actually use N4X though. And then now is the case for 2024. It's actually very understandable what they are predicting, right? They have a 2nd generation node, which would very much align with everything that we've heard from A18. And then N5As for automotive. It basically doesn't matter. And N3E in this case, as I said, it's not a very like ambitious node. In fact, when you look at their comparisons to previous generations, they actually don't even compare N3E versus N3. They just compare N3 versus N5 and then N3E versus N5. And from this, you can basically ascertain that N3E is like 5% better in terms of power, 3% better in terms of performance, but the range can vary. The chip density should be basically identical to N3. It will also depend a little bit on the specific implementation. Like there's a technology called FinFlex that will allow manufacturers to customize basically just how dense, for example, N3E gets and just how efficient it gets. But then they also have a prediction for N2. And this is where it gets interesting, because we basically, all of us expected that N3P would be the node for 2025, similar to how like N4 was the node for 2022, right? Two follow-up like mid-gen nodes after one major new node. For N5, the new nodes were N5P and N4. And for N3, we expected that those nodes would be N3E, which is very likely what is happening this year. And then N3P and N3X next year. Now, the most optimistic of us, including me, have speculated that TSMC might actually return to a 2-year schedule, and that this phenomenon that we saw between like the N5 node to the N3 node basically was the fault of the pandemic, right? There were like logistic problems. They had like so much demand that they maybe don't even felt like they needed a brand new node. They obviously with work from home. Now in Asia that was a little bit differently implemented, obviously in Taiwan than it was in much of the West, but still you had like a shortage of engineers basically at work designing new nodes, actually getting hands-on with new prototypes. So this is what led to N5 to N3 being a year longer than N7 to N5, for example, was. Now some people speculated that it wasn't necessarily like a pandemic issue, and basically that this would become their next like schedule, right? That basically all nodes going forward would need like 3 years to get to a new node instead of 2. Oh, my voice is now almost gone. Now this schedule basically shows us that no, they actually believe that N2 will be ready versus N3 by a similar gap how N5 was ready after N7. So just 2 years. They still predict that in 2025 they will have a new node built on 3nm and FinFET, while N2 will be their first GAAFET node. And that N3P node, in my estimation, is that basically everyone and their mother is getting N3E this year, right? So Apple will not have any node advantages this year. I believe that the A18 chip, for example, will be on the same N3E node as the Snapdragon 8 Gen 4, unless they also cheap out on the 8 Gen 4 and build it again on N4, similar to what they're doing with the X Elite, but that's another conversation. But basically for 2025, what could happen is that Apple basically gets exclusive, more exclusive than ever before, access to a new node that is very much in short supply. And in that case, I actually believe that while I predict that this year N3E will be the chip, will be the node for the A18 and the A18 Pro in both the iPhone 16 and 16 Pro, while in 2025 I believe that only the Pro models will get 2nm, and then basically the older models just either get an A18 chip that is still on N3E, or maybe they make a small like node jump to N3P for an A18 Plus or something like that. And then in 2026 we would just get a newer node that is updated over N2, as was updated N5 to N5P, as was N7 to N7 Plus. We would get an N2P, and the main change here would be backplane power delivery, which is supposed to be like a main efficiency driver for a gate-all-around transistor technology. Again, I'm not an expert here. I know a lot, but I am not an expert in the sense that I can go into a lot of detail, but I definitely know my schedules, and I've been in quite a lot of discussion in Twitter, on Twitter and on my channel as well, with people who basically insist that N2 has no chance of powering, which at that point would be the iPhone 17 Pro. And my suggestion is that yes, it absolutely can. Maybe it would lead to the 1 or even 1.5 month delay of the iPhone 17 Pro Pro, don't forget that this happened in the past. For example, the iPhone 12 Pro was delayed by a month, and the iPhone 12 Pro Max basically only launched in November instead of September. So Apple absolutely is known to push the launch of their more expensive and better products, or any product, whenever it's needed, right? Apple knows that it's much better to have a product that has all the great selling points they need, instead of trying to cheap out 1 year and then risking having no advantages over the competition the next year. In fact, this year they will not have a note advantage, as I predict, over the competition. But then the year after, they will suddenly have a huge advantage over the competition, because if you look at N2 versus N3E, then suddenly we see huge gaps, right? 25 to 30% improvements in power consumption, 10 to 15% improvements in performance, which once you have like such a high lead as Apple does in like single core performance, adding a potential 15% just from the Note is huge. Having a 15% density adjustment is fantastic. Now, granted, that will likely come with a price increase, but believe me, Apple can handle that price. And yeah, basically volume manufacturing lines up pretty much with what we saw with N3. Volume manufacturing for N3 was supposed to be second half of 2022. I'm sorry. That's old data. That's old data. It was actually supposed to be second half of 2022, but then it moved into like Q4 of 2022. We got like some bigger trial runs, and basically it started production when N3E was supposed to hit production. So yeah, actually by this prediction, N2 would only come out in 2026, and in fact, this is my biggest discussion with Vadim Yurev from MaxTech, who says, well, but look at this, right? This was supposed to be like H2 2022 for N3, but N3 only came out in late 2023. And while that is correct, that timeline that we see here has been very much the one affected by pandemic delays, shortages, pricing issues, while here we are definitely having trial runs for N2 already late this year. So that would more line up with actually when we got like big trial runs for N3 like late 2022. And then we would see true volume production very early in the second half of 2025, and that would then lead to an iPhone in October or November even that has all the chips that it needs, and it might be like in short supply for even a month or two, but then it like really comes to its own during the holiday season and like early January, even up to February. Some people will say, well, Apple wouldn't risk those sales. Apple absolutely risks those sales. We saw it with the iPhone 12 models. We saw it with the iPhone 10 models. Apple absolutely is known to delay stuff when they really need the time, because they know that their stuff sells throughout the year. They are not fully dependent on just the holiday season. Apple has long transcended the need for specific holidays. Like the holidays help on a seasonal basis, but basically people buy iPhones whenever they want to buy iPhones. People buy like iPhone 14 models still, like 1.5 years later, because they finally hit the price that they wanted. So anybody who says, oh, Apple is way too much bound to the holidays, that is simply not true. So that is my prediction here. You can actually see that there are newer articles on this, including from like Anantech. I recommend you read up on stuff like FinFlex and backside power delivery if that interests you. This is basically stuff that makes new notes more interesting in that regard, because that's stuff that we didn't have before. FinFlex makes N3 more variable variable, more customizable by individual manufacturers. Backside power delivery will make TSMC's GAAFET nodes even more competitive with the likes of Intel and Samsung, which are integrating this technology even like a year earlier than TSMC, if the current schedules are correct. I apologize for having drawn out this for so long, but yeah, basically what I'm trying to say is that according to Digitimes, which, yes, Digitimes is kind of notorious for being very right every once in a while, very often sharing info that is very much like, yeah, no shit, Sherlock, right? And then often getting it wrong. So they're not the greatest like share of information, but basically they're saying that TSMC's 2nm schedule is basically on point with the timeline prediction that we have seen before, and that Apple could therefore start using 2nm chips as soon as next year. Now, my prediction is that if we see 2nm chips from Apple in 2025, it will only be like one chip. And I know that sounds weird, but if we get 2nm in 2025 from Apple, then I see it only being the A19 Pro. It would be at that point, or it would be like either an M4 or an M5. It depends on which generation it will be. I don't see like what we saw with like 7nm or 5, like what we saw with 5nm, where the A14 and the M1 came out basically back to back. I don't know if the supply for 2nm will be big enough for that, but what I could see is basically the iPhone 17, yeah, it would be the iPhone 17 Pro launches with the A19 Pro chip based on 2nm in the second half to late 2025. And then around March, April, all the way up to WWDC in 2026, we get like M series chips based on the same node, and then in late 2026 we then would get an A20 chip with backside power delivery, so N2P. This is currently my most optimistic and somewhat logical prediction. Obviously, if we get too crazy, then I wouldn't be predicting an iPhone delay because of this, and I would be saying that M series chips on 2nm are coming out in 2025 as well. No, I don't think that the supply will be quite that good, but I do suspect it will be good enough to power the Pro models in 2025, the Pro iPhone models. So this was a very, very long-winded coverage of this one prediction. Now, TSMC will also be working on 1.4nm basically on a 2-year gap again. And this is interesting because at that point we would know, right? If it takes for 2025 for us to get 2nm, it's very likely that 1.4nm would come in 2027. If 2nm only comes to actual production devices in 2026, then 1.4nm by this logic will be pushed to 2028 for production devices. What's interesting about that is that they're definitely promising a return to 2-year gaps down from 3-year gaps. We just don't know if the 3-year gaps, if there will be still a 3-year gap from 3nm to 2nm, but there definitely won't be a 3-year gap from 2nm to 1.4nm. And I kind of assume that even if there is a 3nm gap from 3nm to 2nm, that would still be a result from some of the pandemic delays and the complexity of switching from FinFET to GAAFET, which obviously wouldn't be a problem anymore for 1.4nm, because 1.4nm, as is 2nm, would be based on gate-all-around transistors. So, and our last topic is a pretty small one. At least I'm hoping to keep it small, and you can see I'm sweating, not because this is so exhausting, but because I already had a long day and I forgot to turn on my my ventilator. It's not a ventilator in English. I always forget that word. Basically, it's all about Apple and AI. it's honestly not much info, which is both a bummer but also very much a relief to me for this particular video. And that comes down to, we are getting a lot of AI in iOS 18. We basically know that, and there are two reasons for that. For one, we have leaks for that, from everything from Mark Gurman to other leakers. But the other point is that everyone is doing AI. Windows 12 will likely be introduced and will have as a requirement a neural processing unit in every chip that does at least 40 trillion operations per second, right? Which would mean that basically every chip we currently have on the market would be incapable of that unless it also uses its GPU, and then it kills battery life. So a lot of crazy stuff, and Apple basically cannot afford to not do at least some AI stuff, but everything points towards that they have been actually working on AI stuff for quite a long while. And we know that from simply looking even at the iPhone, right? Like, as far back as the iPhone 10 and the A11 chip, we have like processors with Apple's neural engine. And then when we look at the iPhone 12, just a year later, Apple had a dramatically faster neural engine. And this is why subsequent versions of iOS, for example, had like exclusive functionality for the A12 chip and up, because it had this much more powerful neural processing unit. And we now have much more powerful Apple neural engines inside our devices, also much more efficient ones. And now the question is, well, what can we do with them, both on a local level but also leveraging the cloud? What can Apple do once they have like NVIDIA H100s blades in like their servers or something like that? And we don't have that many details. I've covered on this channel that Apple supposedly wants like assistance for apps like Pages, Keynote, and Numbers. And we might have a much smarter Siri that basically uses advanced ChatGPT for like large language models. But we've also have features supposedly that would be coming to Safari, and this is discovered by Nicolas Alvarez. Supposedly there will be a feature called it will be a Safari browsing assistant. Now, if you actually look at the broader industry, you will find that there are plenty of like the Arc Search browser, for example, currently, that try to summarize websites for you, that give you like, instead of a like long list of search that you associate usually with like Google search and even Bing, if you use Bing, that instead of that, it just tries to give you an answer. It tries to give you sort of like a self-constructed Wikipedia like article on every topic and question you might have. So basically it utilizes all the stuff we know, love, and also fear from stuff like ChatGPT 4 and Google Gemini. And it will do a lot of more advanced stuff. Supposedly there will also be like visual search, which we don't know. Like maybe this would allow stuff like a Vision Pro. If you look at an object, it properly recognizes it. Now, the easiest stuff that it could do, because honestly iPhones already can do it, it would allow it to copy and paste the text from the real world basically right away into your operating system. Now, that obviously already exists on the iPhone, but on Vision Pro it would have to be integrated in a much more natural way. So visual search would be part of it. However, I also kind of would not put it past them to have like visual search do like some of the stuff that Apple Photos does. For example, if you have a photo of a cat in your Apple Photos library, it knows that it's a cat and something like that. And I assume that Vision Pro might do something like this as well down the road. So there's a lot of rumors about what kind of AI features we are getting in iOS 18, which ones would be like run completely locally on the neural processing unit, which one therefore would maybe exclusive to the A17 Pro, maybe the A18 chip as well. Maybe they introduce some exclusive features for the A17 Pro at WWDC, and some other features that are exclusive to the newer iPhones then during the iPhone presentation in September. Throughout iOS 18, basically, we've talked about like Apple would also likely have some kind of like Apple GPT. So they would have their own large language model. They still wouldn't have like their own search engine or something like that. So this is why there's also a lot of rumors about them potentially cooperating with like OpenAI and Microsoft for potentially cooperation with ChatGPT, or with Google for integration of Gemini, or even with Weibo from China with their own large language model. And the question is, some say that Apple might use their LLMs for basically like server-based stuff. My speculation has always been that it has more to do with the fact that those companies actually have search engines and that Apple needs search engines. To power their AI, because obviously they need to get the data from somewhere that is current and up to date. And for China specifically, I would believe that they might actually like license their LLM as well, because obviously Apple has far less data for China than a Chinese company, but then in English they would have to compete with ChatGPT and Google Gemini and stuff like that, and Claude and whatever else there is right now. And the idea would be, is Apple's Apple GPT good enough to only partner with like Microsoft or Google for like search engine stuff, or would Apple also license stuff like ChatGPT directly, or Google Gemini directly, or whatever other kind of large language model there is out there? So obviously I don't know that. We have heard multiple rumors that there would be like significantly better Siri integration, so Siri actually recognizes you better, not just the words you actually spoke, but also what those words actually mean in like a semantic and syntactic context of a sentence, because sometimes Siri doesn't grasp the most simple of sentences, unfortunately. In messages it could give you everything from like, do you want like an automated response and stuff like that, and I assume that something similar would then also apply for email, but then for email they would have like a much more like formal sounding like tone for the LLM, while in messages it would be much more like hi and how are you and stuff like that. And I assume that they would also do something like that for their other in-house apps like Pages, Keynote, Numbers. And if Apple actually got on the train of like generative AI with like stuff that also helps like with photo editing, video editing, then yes, it would also be integrated, just what like we saw from Google Photos and like the latest Pixel device. So there is a lot, and iOS 18, according to Mark Gurman, according to people at Apple, is internally being talked about as like the largest, the biggest iOS update ever, which is obviously very, very exciting. And beyond that, it would also like AI would go beyond iOS itself. It would power like Xcode on Macs, Spotlight search. It would create potentially new features for Apple Health and Apple Watch. So there's so much actually that could happen. And just the latest one we got is basically a browsing assistant, which could be, as I said, similar to solutions such as Arc Search. Beyond that, the last thing to cover, it's not actually a long thing to cover, and that is that iOS 18 will supposedly be getting a redesign, and we got like some images for this, and I don't have too much of good information about this. This is speculation. I'm sorry, I should really change like my browser to to English so that it doesn't give you all that German results. Jamie, you're back. You're saying, I wonder what Apple will be doing to justify Tim Cook saying Apple will break new ground in generative AI. Jamie, this is actually a fantastic question, and actually I think I can answer that pretty well. I think that Apple will advocate for the fact that their AI or their generative AI will be more local based than any other solution. So sometimes they will defer to the cloud because the cloud is more powerful, the cloud has more data, all hail the cloud, but much more so than Google's solution, much more so than anything Microsoft does with OpenAI, Apple will push a lot of it onto the iPhone itself and then on the Mac as well. I just ran some AI benchmarks on my M1 Max MacBook Pro, and it's honestly amazing how good it is. I can only imagine how good M3 devices and then later M4 and something like that will be. So that will be one thing, which is local. Based on local, Apple will also be able to advertise privacy and security. Yes, Jamie, this is what I actually wanted to cover. I know that leak is fake. And I also want to explain why it's fake, because a lot of people really wanted to believe it, and I knew without any confirmation of it being fake that it was fake, because I actually understand Apple. And if you believe that I understand Apple, please consider subscribing, commenting, liking, sharing. And if you want to support this very well Apple understanding YouTuber, please consider subscribing to my Patreon. The link is in the description of this channel, or sending me a super chat or a super sticker to offset my hoarse throat. No, so those are 2 points, right? It would be like locally running, and therefore Apple would also be able to advertise this as being much more private and secure, which obviously, like, if you know, like Apple's Las Vegas ads, right? They're very much a privacy company, Apple Las Vegas ad. Yeah, so what happens on your iPhone stays on your iPhone. So they could be actually doing something similar for like their AI stuff. And the third one is, it's not only locally run and therefore it's more private, but it's actually integrated into our apps, right? Because yes, there are like integrated AI solutions for even stuff like Photoshop, for example, and it supposedly works really well. But that's like one app, right? Even all of Adobe apps don't even have like that kind of comprehensive AI integration yet. But Apple could, like Microsoft, for example, has like Copilot for their stuff like Word, but none of it is really locally run currently. And a lot of it is like, does not integrate that well with like all your personal data and stuff like that. And I believe this would be the third major point, which is our AI is integrated throughout the operating system. It powers all our first-party apps to a degree. Our messages behave like our mail app for like responding. Pages, Keynote, and Numbers work with data in a similar way. Your contacts, calendars, and phone app know like what appointments you have, who called you. It will use like AI to maybe filter out spam emails and spam phone calls and stuff like that. And the fact that it's all integrated, that Apple has a solution for a little bit of everything, will be their main talking point. This is what I believe, that Apple will say like, look, at some point we might not have the absolute best AI. If you like try our like ChatGPT direct comparison, maybe it doesn't code that well, right? But it codes much better in Swift, right? Which is our programming language. So get fucked if you actually want to integrate another AI solution into Xcode. Well, you simply cannot. And I think this will be like their 3 points. Locally run there, and therefore more private and secure as well, beyond just the fact that it's also more efficient, doesn't need browser connection, internet connection, and all that jazz. And then the third and the most major one, which is also like the one most easily put on like Apple's like slideshows, right, where they have like new feature, And I think they could say like, they could even put like not like iOS 18 in the center, but like Apple GPT or Apple AI in the center, and then around it they would have like Mail does this, Messages does this, Photos does this, iMovie does this, Final Cut Pro even does this, and stuff like that. This is what I believe. Their argument will be the same one they always have. It's their ecosystem and the cohesive integration for hardware, software, and service, which obviously, like Google might try to match with something like Pixel. Microsoft has no real way of matching that, especially not across phones, watches, laptops, and stuff like that. Apple can, and I believe this will be their advantage and the thing they will most advertise. And this, while I believe this to be real, well, the thing I don't believe to be real is actually a leak for a visionOS-like redesign for iOS 18. And Jamie already spoiled it already in the chat, but yes, this is fake. And why is this fake? Now, not only is the image not the greatest, but I can get with that. I mean, I assume it's like a screenshot, right? And like alleged iOS design resource, right? And my point with this is, I don't get the excitement for having Vision Pro redesigns across iOS and macOS. Now, when you actually look at like the iOS 7 design video, and when Apple redesigned macOS with, I believe, with Mavericks, no, it was with Yosemite. Apple has shown that they use like translucency to suggest hierarchy, right? One app sits on top of another, the keyboard sits on top of the app and something like that. I apologize, like my stream seems to have some issues. I don't know why my internet is good enough, but it's... I hope that if you're watching this video afterwards, like it has been fixed by YouTube in post. The point with a visionOS-like redesign is it doesn't really make sense, right? Because visionOS is very different from iOS and from macOS. visionOS is designed to integrate like the real world, a constant like augmented reality feed with your 2D and 3D apps. This is why everything is to a degree transparent, because it still gives you that idea of what is happening around you. This is why those effects are actually quite expensive. The way even Apple calculates how shadows are dropped from like a floating window. But this does not make sense for the iPhone, right? Or the iPad or the Mac, because those are not constant windows to the outside world. You don't need that level of transparency, translucency. You don't need the, like, granted, this specific button design, I mean, it could work. It's not bad. But everything that reduces visibility on the iPhone also behaves a little differently. With how you have, like, basically two screens, you have like a little bit of 3D understanding of the world around you and everything. And if you have like a two-dimensional thing in front of you, well, you can already differentiate it pretty well from your like real environment. While on iPhone, if you have like translucent element over translucent element and something like that, it can get confusing really fast. And in fact, when iOS 7 came out, a lot of people initially complained about how aggressive some of the translucency and transparency effects were. Apple ended up tuning a lot of them down. Look at how the iOS 7 like translucency for the keyboard works and how it has worked in subsequent generations. It's much more subtle. Like the notification center has also been changed to basically not focus on translucency or anything like that over time. The control center has also gotten a major like change in how it handles translucency and transparency. And I don't think that a visionOS like design language actually makes sense here. Now, this has already been proven that this is fake. For one, I don't like, yeah, I mean, it could have been that Apple has like an internal like design resources for iOS 18. But regardless, what we've heard from Mark Gurman is that we'll be getting a redesign of the home screen. I have actually said over the last couple of years, Mac OS app icons versus iOS. Right. If you actually look at the macOS icons, you will find that they're very similar. They just have a little bit of faux 3D. And that actually will look cool on something like Vision Pro. There's a little bit of that came over to Vision Pro, so that if you like have like a little bit of what is it called when you like tilt your head and you see a little bit more of the parallax or look, right? And I think that's really cool. I like the Big Sur icons for the most part. I don't like all of them. I actually go like this. Hope I'm not covering up too much here. Can I not go for full screen? Oh, there it is. So you can actually see that some of them translate really, really nicely. This is this is Big Sur versus Catalina. So this is before and after. For one, Apple gave them the traditional squircles that we've had before, that we have on iOS, right? So it already is more similar to iOS. But if you look before, like well, no, that's macOS. That comparison doesn't really make sense because it doesn't show. macOS was always more 3D than iOS. Where's the comparison where it's actually like iOS versus macOS? Nope, those are the old icons. Doesn't have what exactly I'm looking for, unfortunately. This is iOS 7, so those are older iOS app icons. I mean, I could find just like, I mean, this is all the app icons we have for like macOS, right? Or like the major ones. You can like see like the 3D of like the A on the App Store. You can find a little bit of 3D for like the compass needle in Safari. You'll find that like the Stocks app has like a little bit of like this shadow on it. The same goes for the Voice Memos app. And if we actually have like iOS app icons, does Apple have like a documentation where they list like every single one? Yeah, so you can actually see. Oh, that's actually really cool because it helps a lot with understanding this. But they don't give too many examples. But when you actually look at even like the music app that they've shown like an example here, you can see that no, there's not that much resolution here. Apple, you can do better. Yeah, no, those are not. This is iOS 8. Why can't I just find the latest iOS? I mean, not much changed with iOS 17, but iOS 17 app icon set. Yeah. My viewership dropped in half from this. Like, man, my internet is like really dog shit today. Like, I want like this, but like for more apps, for like more detail, right? It doesn't load. Okay. iOS 14, macOS, Big Sur. Yeah, this is like the best comparison we can find, which is such a weird thing here. We have like the Catalina comparisons prior to macOS, but like, give me just like macOS Big Sur app icons. Yeah, those are all of them. And then iOS 14 app icons. What is happening? Oh, it said because you could now change something like that. Oh my god, iOS 14 app icons. Mac rumors. No, I don't want to change stuff. I want the official like things that have been like slightly refined. Like, I don't want to go back to iOS 7 or iOS 10. That's all I want. Google has gotten so much worse. Yeah, right? Like, it's like Google search, especially when it comes to photos and stuff like that, is not supposed to give you like the most, like, it's not news, right? It's supposed to give me just something relevant. And, I'll just use the example that we have in the beginning, right? Or is this, oh, right here. macOS Stories Reviews. I'm sorry to be killing my viewership, but I really want to like... Okay, so if you look at this, right, you can actually, just in your head, if you know the iOS icons, you see that those things, like especially like faced, like, I'll just like iOS messages icon, which I'm, yeah, my god, why can I not get the real one? Yeah, so this is the regular Apple Messages bubble icon. It'll just look, yeah, this is how it looks. Damn, this drove me crazy. And if you can see that bubble here, you will find that, yeah, this is actually like a bubble, right? You can see the 3D effect on it. You can see some of, you can even see it throwing some shade underneath itself, right? And the same goes for the FaceTime icon, which I believe will be probably also difficult to search for. FaceTime icon. No, I can actually find it, right? And you can actually see it very clearly here. And then you can compare it very clearly to this. I apologize, guys, I've took enough time. But you can basically see the 3D effect. It is very, very much different. And of course, there is one good example, which is iOS GarageBand, right? This is how the iOS GarageBand app looks like. So more abstract, very 2D. And then macOS Big Sur GarageBand icon. Yeah, that's how it looks, right? Yeah, it does. So it basically got that squircle, but it's still like macOS still allows you to have stuff outside the squircle, but it also, beyond just being not just confined to the squircle, it also has like the much more like accurate like actual device, right? It's not as simplified as the iOS icon. GarageBand. Yeah, I can actually see it here. That's good. Because I am running on a Mac. I just don't want to expose any personal data by searching my own stuff. So the reason why I'm doing this very, very torturous kind of thing is because if you actually like think about what defines big updates for a lot of people, unfortunately for a lot of people it does come down to, well, do my icons look different? And we have had even like huge updates like iOS 14 with like widgets and stuff like that, and iOS 16 with a complete like lock screen redesign. And because the icons stayed relatively the same, especially while macOS got like the big change with Big Sur, a lot of people basically said like, like, well, I cannot see the difference. And my suggestion is that Apple borrows a little bit from some of the better macOS Big Sur icons. Like, I love the preview icon, for example. I think that the stocks icon does not need that much shade from the top and bottom, but for example, like I like the App Store, I like Safari. I think if you tune a little bit the bubble design in both FaceTime and Messages, you can make it look a lot better than like the completely 2D look, while still making it a lot more like visually engaging. And then there are like even smaller differences and stuff, like the Photos app, which is like a little bit more like translucent and color overlaying versus the iOS version. Mark Gurman basically promised us a big home screen redesign, which is why I'm expecting this. Supposedly you will also be able to put icons and widgets anywhere on the screen, so you're not defined to the grid where everything moves automatically upwards to align with each other. You could just have like something in the bottom left and something in the top left, something in the bottom right, and a lot of free space in the middle, basically. So this is a kind of what makes iOS 18 so big beyond the iOS 8, beyond the artificial intelligence stuff. A lot of people who have speculated it will look like this, which is the visionOS design from Vision Pro. That's supposedly not happening. I hope you guys aren't too disappointed by that. I never expected it to happen, but I know a lot of people quite like what they saw with Vision Pro and automatically assumed. I think this actually speaks volumes a lot of what we also see with like the iPad and the Mac, where a lot of people say like, oh, the iPad is being held back by its operating system, and for example, until like Stage Manager, it didn't have like the ability to put like 4 apps, let's say, on the screen for multitasking. And a lot of people said, oh, I just want macOS style multitasking, but they never asked themselves, well, macOS is designed for a keyboard and mouse. How does that work exactly for an iPad? And Apple came up with Stage Manager. If you actually look to my left, you can actually see that I use Stage Manager on my Mac all the time, and I actually don't use it on my iPad because I don't use multitasking that much on my iPad. So a lot of people just want, basically they see something that Apple has designed for another product with a completely different like use case, a completely different like user interface, a completely different UX, and they just say, well, now I want it on that other product because it's shiny and new, maybe it has another feature that I want, and they never ask themselves, well, does that feature, like, for one, is it really needed on that other product? But also, if I just copy paste that feature to that already existing product, will it work well there, right? And this is, for example, why Vision Pro has like this crazy mix of multitasking stuff that has been taken from stuff like Stage Manager, because Apple clearly has been working on newer paradigms and seeing, what works for the Mac can work for the iPad, but what works for the iPad really can work for Vision Pro, right? And this is where a lot of stuff gets more complicated. And while I can understand why a lot of people say like, well, the iPad is getting an M3 chip, you can give it 2 terabytes of storage, 16 gigabytes of RAM. Why doesn't it run macOS? Or why doesn't it at least have its own version of Xcode and something like that? And Apple will say, well, because iPads are designed to be a little different. Over time, we'll probably close a lot of the gaps that iPads have over versus Macs. We might give it Xcode and not just Swift Playgrounds. We might even give it a full terminal at some point. It will not have all the functionality of a terminal on macOS because iPadOS is much more restricted, and that's a balance we need to find ourselves while we're developing like iPadOS 18, 19, 20, 21. And if you want all those features right now, similar to how I needed a Mac to like stream videos, you better get a Mac. And if you want an Apple device that supports like a stylus and something like that, then you get an iPad. Now you could get like a Wacom tablet that connects to your MacBook, but that's probably not quite the experience you are after. So I'm just trying to tell people in a very, very convoluted way, as basically is the entire video that's now approaching 2 hours. Be open-minded. Don't necessarily like just ask for stuff because it exists somewhere else. Like, be open-minded to the idea that maybe the hundreds and thousands of hyper-creative and intelligent people creating this might actually have a slightly better understanding what is necessary. Now, customer is king, and you can show that by not buying something, or in contrast, buying something that you like, but you cannot be king in the way that you cannot come into the restaurant and demand they cook something for you with your own recipe. You can vote with basically your wallet by not buying something, by not coming back to the restaurant, by leaving a bad review or something like that, but you cannot force the restaurant to cook the way you want from the ground up. That's just not how it works. And basically, like, I've been mostly on board with Apple's decisions. I'm even on board with the decision to keep iOS a lockdown operating system. But, for example, the EU wants something different. And now both Apple and I have to work with that somehow. So this is basically me saying iOS 18 will be interesting, but don't just ask for like, oh, it should look like Vision Pro because Vision Pro looks cool, so I want visionOS. No, be open to Apple might have completely different icons for you. You might hate them, just like people hated iOS 7 at first, how people hated Big Sur at first, and to a degree Yosemite, though as far as I remember, basically everyone was pretty positive about Yosemite. And when the iPad comes out and it's much more expensive than before, don't like lose your panties over it right away. Consider that this is the only device, like the only tablet with a 3nm based processor, the only device with a dual stacked OLED panel and stuff like that. You don't have to buy it, and you can vote with your wallet that it might be just a tad too expensive, but the margins very likely will be pretty much the same for Apple, right? The device will probably be 20% or so more expensive to build, and the price will likely be 20-25% more expensive because of that. So just keep that in mind before you are either super happy, like with fake leaks like this, or super disappointed, like with when we saw rumors like $17.99 pricing. Yeah, that is a reason to be upset. But if it comes out and it's $12.99, take it easy. Jamie, I hope we get some nice gaming announcements at WWDC, like Metal 3, Metal FX, improved controller support, game porting tool. Yeah, we have actually gotten a lot over the last 2 years. I would assume we would definitely get like some new games announced, right? Like, I mean, we got like our Death Strandings, our like Resident Evil games, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more. I especially wouldn't be surprised if we saw more like during the iPhone 16 announcement, and Apple would say like, look, the A18 is not just more powerful than like the A17, but it's also like more efficient, and it has like better cooling, and we've upgraded our like ray tracing engine from the ground up, and it now is even faster than, like, maybe ray tracing is like 50% faster, but the restored GPU part is only 20% faster, and Apple could like say, look how disproportionately we improved ray tracing, because ray tracing is that important. And yeah, I don't think we need like a brand new Metal version, because we have basically everything in Metal we need. I could see Apple going on stage and saying, here's like Metal FX 2, right? Or even 3, depending on how they want to label it. Like, we had like Metal FX that was like either a spatial or temporal solution. Then we had a purely temporal solution that was powered by the AI engine. And now we have like maybe a competitor to DLSS 3.5. And now it specifically works for technologies like ray tracing and something that NVIDIA calls like ray reconstruction and something like that. So I definitely could see them being much more up to date, and I could also see them still like working with even better like optimization to make dynamic caching even better and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff that also just from third-party support is like we still don't have that much. I don't know what Apple calls it, but it's what the consoles do, right? Where data is streamed directly, basically from storage to the GPU and not to like the CPU part, and you have a very fast compression and decompression engines and the hardware to deal with that, and Metal does support that, and Apple does have good encoder compression and decompression engines in their A and M series chips, but I don't think we've actually seen games that come with that. So there is a lot that could happen with gaming. I definitely agree. Even if it's not necessarily like brand new tech, it could be like games that use that new tech. At least that's kind of my prediction. Yeah, I'm kind of wrapping up here unless somebody has like some last minute questions or suggestions, because as you can hear, my voice is very hoarse. I'll not be making videos tomorrow or on Saturday, but I could be making one on Sunday. And if I don't make one on Sunday, I'm definitely making one on Monday. By that point, maybe we'll have even more leaks and rumors, maybe a more concrete date for the iPad release, something like that. I thank you all so much. We had like relatively decent viewership during this video, which I didn't expect after like an almost 3-week hiatus. I really want to say also thank you to Jamie, who was like very active in the chat. I want to say thank you to anyone who also contacted me on Twitter in the last couple of weeks and months, where we've also added more followers because a lot of you come here. I kind of apologize for starting this off with something as hot like the Dbrand topic, but it's really near and dear to my heart that all people at least try to be nice when there's no reason to not be, right? I think there are absolutely people who deserve vitriol, absolutely people who deserve condemnation and even insults to a degree, but yeah, this was definitely not warranted behavior by Dbrand, and they tried to buy themselves out of it with 10 grand, which is not a great look either. Yeah, we then continued with like some sadder news about iPad Pro basically moving all the way down from March to May. We've talked about to a ridiculous degree about the potential of when we're getting 3 nanometer, when we're getting 2 nanometer, even the potential that like the next iPads might actually have like an M4 chip instead of M3. So thank you especially Jamie for giving us a lot to think about when it comes to like the T8, what was it all? Like I already forgot to a degree. I believe it was like T8. Oh, no. T8? Yeah, T8 101, T8 101, T8 121, and the discrepancy between like the next iPad potentially having a T8 132, which would point to an M4 rather than T8 122, which would be an M3 chip. So quite a lot we've covered there, and then a lot of iOS stuff as well. Granted, I could not speak with a lot of detail on stuff like a browser assistant feature, but in general, I think we can all agree that there's a lot of AI stuff in the work, implemented throughout the OS, throughout different applications, and on a more superficial level, we've just talked about the fact that there might be a big like iOS 18 change in terms of home screen design. We've talked about icons and everything else like that. So this is why I'm really tired. I want to thank you all so much for your support. I hope that that support will only increase as also I increase my output, because I know that you don't owe me your support. Before everything else, I owe you content before I get your support, so I very much appreciate all the views you give me, all the direct support you give me, and in that regard, I do want to once again plead and ask for a comment, a like, a share, or you subscribing to the channel if you like my content. And if you feel like really engaging with me, you can follow me on Twitter. The link is in the description of this channel. I will never call it X officially, only for jokes. And for really direct support, you can find my Patreon link also in the description of this channel. And while I'm live, feel free to leave a super chat or a super sticker. And if I'm not live, you can still send a super thanks, I believe it's called, on a video that had already been updated. Over time, I'll try to find like maybe alternative ways, like maybe channel memberships and stuff like that. But for that, I also believe we first need to grow. When it comes to live stream viewership, most of my viewership still comes primarily from views after the video has already been out there. Has a lot to do with the markets that watch me and when those markets actually have time, so I fully understand that. But as I always say, just watching the video is very much appreciated. So if you don't have the money, if you don't feel like even commenting or something like that, feel free to just watch, just enjoy. If I can add anything to like your tech entertainment and your tech infotainment, then I'm very glad to be being of service. So with that, I would like to just ask you to also say what you would like to see me comment on next, because there's potentially a lot, but also not very much at the same time. Like a lot of stuff is like us now waiting for like iPads in May and WWDC in June, and I'll definitely be covering all of that live as it's happening. But before that, it's mostly rumors about like iPads in May, WWDC in June. So let's see how it all plays out. In the future, I also hope to keep covering like the Apple legal stuff with the DOJ lawsuit in the United States, with basically the European Union going to town on Apple because of the Digital Markets app. I would also, especially now, I don't have like the latest and greatest MacBook, but I do have a decent one with an M1 Max chip. So if there's also like some great gaming news for the Mac or something like that, I would like to keep covering that as well. I do have an up-to-date iPhone, so if definitely new and exclusive software comes out for that, you can also look out for that on this channel as well. And if I decide to maybe purchase an M3 or M4 iPad, I'll let you know, and then we'll do what I also did in the past, which is like unboxings and commenting on new accessories and new materials. I highly recommend you go back and check out my coverage of the fine woven cases by Apple. It's actually one of my favorite videos. It's really low quality, like in terms of production value, but it's really fun to me. So thank you again so much. I'll see you guys next time. This is Mark Tech tuning out.